If you are a writer, you should be limiting your use of adjectives. And you don't have to believe me about this because today you are going to be hearing F. Scott Fitzgerald speak at length on this topic. And when it comes to writing rules, I know people tweak out all the time like F. Scott Fitzgerald uses adjectives or Stephen King uses adverbs. Wow, you're such a great investigator. But what these rules first and foremost are trying to make you do is realize that every word, every sentence is supposed to hit, that everything has a meaning, that to be a great literary writer, if you want to be a genre writer that just scribe shits everywhere, then that's okay. And some genre writers are very literary. But the best writers in the world actually contemplate their word usage. And when it comes to these writing rules, breaking some of them is okay. If you want to use a ton of adjectives or adverbs, that's all right. But they serve as hotspots because let's say there are 25 big writing rules and you only follow 3 of them, then most likely your writing is going to suck unless you are the God tier outlier, which you aren't. And so what they give us is the opportunity to say, which of these am I going to break? And how does that influence my work? And until you experiment with both sides, using too many adverbs or not using any adverbs at all, you don't understand both sides of the coin. And so I just kind of want to open with that because I understand it's sometimes hard for people to wrap their head around this idea of writing rules. And my name is Ian, and here on Write Conscious, I talk about the best books and authors of all time. I also help activate authors like you so that we can all create a literary renaissance. And so you are here for F. Scott Fitzgerald, so let's now hear from him. About adjectives, all fine prose is based on the verbs carrying the sentences. They make sentences move. Probably the finest technical poem in English is Keats' Eve of St. Agnes. A line like the haired limp trembling through the frozen grass is so alive that you race through it, scarcely noticing it. Yet it has colored the whole poem with its movement. The limping, trembling, and freezing is going on before your eyes. And we'll look at the entire stanza of that poem in a minute. But I love that Fitzgerald brought this up because I have over on Substack.com, where the literary renaissance is happening, a free sentence structure course, a free fiction course, a bunch of other free courses, and some paid courses. But the very first video in my fiction course and in my sentence structure course is trying to help people realize the power of verbs. And I do multiple videos in the course on them at the start to try to drill it in people's heads that verbs are the most important type of word in the English language. And that most of the time, people's adjectives and adverbs are weak supplements to a sentence that could be activated with a verb. So for those who maybe haven't contemplated this, adjectives are the general decorations. You do need some. Nouns form the structure, but verbs are the muscle and the blood and what keeps everything kind of moving and going and what brings strength to a novel. And when I look and break down beautiful sentences, most of the time, unless they are kind of stylistic outliers, are rooted in the verbs. And obviously, there are very weak verbs, and that's what we hear. Don't use the passive voice or has or been or was or anything like that. But Fitzgerald actually evokes verbal adjectives from the Keats poem because you can turn an adjective into a verb. So if we return to the original sentence, the hare limped trembling through the frozen grass, we will see that the subject is the hare and that limped is in the past tense and the main action of the sentence. But now let's get into these verbal adjectives because trembling right here is a present participle that functions as a verbal adjective, modifying the subject, the hare, describing how it limps. So it isn't a random adjective like scared or fragile. It carries the verb's energy, even though it's grammatically modifying a noun. And so I want you guys to sit with this for a second to see how Keats is creating motion. And in a second, after I review one more thing, I will show you how many writers would write this sentence, how the average writer would say this. But trembling isn't the only verbal adjective because frozen grass is also It's the past participle of the verb to freeze, acting as an adjective describing grass, because the grass is not actively freezing, but has undergone the action of being frozen. And so I'm not joking when I say that this is how most writers would write this same exact image. The hare was scared and moved slowly through the cold grass, or something like that. Maybe something with a little bit more flair. But you can see how all the motion, how all the imagery and style have been removed. Our job here isn't to just describe, and that is an important part, but description is somewhat interesting. But our job as writers is to make people care, to make people want to continue. And the best way to make that happen is to be a kinetic force, to get them on a train of motion and they just don't want to leave. Because people like Cormac McCarthy can use some of these tricks to write an entire one-page sentence with just verbal adjectives carrying these insane descriptions. But that's not how most people should use them. You should be ditching adjectives and adverbs, at least in part, to try to infuse more movement into your novel. Because why do people not care about reading? Most of the time, it's because the author doesn't realize that there is a reader on the other side. People say all the time, I don't write for a reader. I don't write for an audience in mind. I don't want to write anything transformative. And that's why they suck at writing, because you need to know that someone on the other end is receiving this and transforming and following what you are showing them. And what so many authors do when they start navel gazing is they've been mind blown by something and they want to show everyone, and they slow down the motion to show us what they care about. And this is a big problem in literary fiction. I know countless smart people, intellectual authors who know how to write good sentences, maybe know some of these tricks, but they fall into the trap of wanting me to care about something that they care about. And that's something that actually happens very rarely. There have been almost no novels that I've read and then started to care more about the core subject. There have been novels that have enhanced my understanding of things that I already cared about, maybe even if I didn't understand it fully, but I've never necessarily been totally converted by a novel. And when that does happen, that's what we call a masterpiece. Most of the time, transformative fiction brings something to light that's already within you, gives you a new perspective on something that you already know about. Very rarely does a novel show you something new and it becomes this lifelong interest and something that you dwell on and becomes a core part of your soul. And when a novel does do that, that's called a masterpiece. That's called your favorite novel. And so it's a somewhat weird line to talk about because I love Tom Wolfe. Are there any Tom Wolfe fans out there? And I've been raving about his novel A Man in Full for years, and apparently it got adapted into a TV show, and I've always said that it's one of the best examples of close third person out there. But Wolfe at times has these almost Moby Dick type descriptions where it feels like for 2 pages he's describing like the main character's wardrobe or him getting dressed, and just adjectives upon adjectives. And it's a somewhat interesting style that we've shunned away, maybe because of videos like this. And one could call it purple language. And if you guys don't know what purple language is, in time immemorial, one could say, or a couple decades ago, flowery and dramatic and cliche and melodramatic writing was somewhat of a staple. You could open up a magazine and get these long-winded exposés on whatever topic. If you go read some of the old pieces in Time or other things, you'd be like, oh my God, this is insane. And we've kind of moved away from that for a more minimalistic style. And that may be for the best, but once again, I just want to kind of share with you guys that learning purple language, discovering and exploring this stuff is important for the long run, because there are moments somewhere in your future where you are going to need to describe something with a ton of adjectives for an entire page. But to be able to do that well means that you are going to have practiced that on Substack throughout an entire novel or throughout a series of short stories or through poetry, and have that in your writer's toolbox. And so in general, I think that this approach of too many adjectives can kill a lot of the strength of your writing, but I'm not here actively discouraging you guys from doing that. And so if you guys like this video, I have more sentence structure videos and fiction videos and poetry videos where I basically go through a lot of stuff like this at a much deeper level. Over on Substack, there is free content, there is paid content. My own writing is over there. I host a book club. I would love to see you guys over there because Substack is where the literary renaissance is happening, everyone. The best writers in the world are on Substack. The best readers in the world are on Substack. And so if you are a reader or a writer, you need to get over there, and I will see you guys in the next video.